This part is going to cover the HUD. So I'll start with the HUD class I have. It get rid of that. It is a singleton. So show it right here gets created singleton. As far as the functions that it has, it's got initial display, one player, two player, game over, reset the display, it updates the score and lives of the players and the high score against the class itself. Oh, and I'll just show for its members. It has pointers for different classes that specifically control that part of the HUD. So I'll get into that. So it's got high score list, high score, player one score and lives, player two score and lives. The text would be like the credits and bonus life for every 12,000 points. Then game over, obviously, it just shows game over. So on its initial display, it just shows the. I'll just show it right now. Okay. Okay. Yeah, just the display. So in the initial display, it's got the scores, but they display zero. It's got the current high score, the high score list, the text credits to bonus every 12,000. Okay. And then for the one player display, it'll remove the high score list, the text, the game over if it's there, and the player two score. It'll leave just the um, player one's HUD info, and it'll start displaying their lives with two player. Still gets rid of the list, text, all that, except it'll display the two players' lives or player two's lives in the game over. It'll reset the display for player one to score and their lives. It'll start to display the high score list, high scores. Okay, then for the reset. Oh, then here's for the actually that one's old. I have to get rid of that. So for the reset display, it just calls the reset on all the pointers, and here's the different updates. These get called from different managers. So like with the update, player one score gets a new score for player one, and it'll update it, and also tries to update the high score if it can, and it's just calls the different pointers or different classes functions. And I'll just go into those functions now. So we'll go with, well, first I'll show off the let's see, go to the score. Here's player one score. It's its own class. It's got a display, update, and reset. It's got a list for the glyphs, um, next position, then the strings, score length. So when it gets created, the player one score is set to this string, and then the next position uh, is set, and then in the display, uh, just in case, just to reset the next position, uh, vector to the right spot, and then right here is where the actual glyphs get created, and it goes off of the player one score string, which would be this. Then with the update score, it gets an int, converts it to a string, and if that string, if it's just one digit, it'll add a zero to the end, since that's how the centipede game is. If it's one, it'll show 0, 1. It'll reset the the current score, so it's basically just uh, deletes the list of glyphs that are already there, and then it'll adjust the next position to the right spot, and it'll just set get some new glyphs for the score. And that's really all it does. It's the same for player 2 score, and for the lives, it's very similar as well. So I've got a string, and these lives correspond with the blaster sprite or icon. Sets the next position to the appropriate spot. The display is similar. Um, Resets the next position. It'll display the right glyphs. So with the update lives, it'll reset it. It's very similar to the scores. Really not much difference there, except with lives, it obviously gets the lives instead of the score as a parameter. Go into the high score. I made a score entry class for the high score list itself. Okay, and it's just a linked list that I made. So I gotta like set the previous, the next, the scores, initials, then the get score, get initials. So when a score entry gets created, just has a score initials. That's really all it is, just to store the the info for the high score list. That's really all this is for. Then go to the high score list itself. It's a game object because it needs the text entered function from the game object. It's got to display a right score, remove list, update the list, and get a high score. So for the high score list, here is the text for the all the way at the top that says high scores, and then here it creates the high score list. Here's the link list also being created. So we got score of 100. Here are the initials, and I made it very simple to see. So it's very obvious to tell when the high score list gets updated. And the display, it's similar to the not too similar, but so resets the next position. Um, it'll actually tell the get the grid, the current grid from the player manager, and set all of those positions in the grid to blocked. That way the centipede or won't go through them. Then it'll place the glyphs, uh, and then it'll actually go through the list itself. And this displays um, the high score text that just says high score. This is for the actual list itself. It goes to a write score function as it goes through the list, and then the write score converts the score to a string, sets the position accordingly. In this loop writes the score. This section is for the space in between the score and the initials, and this writes the initials themselves. And it also checks, the write score also checks to see if the initials string there's nothing in it. If it's an empty string, then it'll set the position to where the first initial would get placed, and this is for when the player gets to put in their own initials for if they get a high score. And then here's the remove list. This just gets rid of the list from the screen. And then the update list function. So when the player's game is over, it takes their score and it goes through the list. And I have two parameters: the current score and next score. Current score, it's for player 1 and for player 2, but I'll get into a little more. So it goes through the list, checks to see if a score gets beat, creates a new score entry, sets the score, creates an initial string, an empty string. This just if it's if it's the highest score or not, and just sets the pointers appropriately. And then when a high score list is updated, it'll remove the last entry, and if the list isn't updated, it'll it'll enable the central manager, which would be that controls whether the selection for 1 or 2 player mode, and it enables it. That way you can pick 1 or 2 player mode again. If the list does get updated, it'll in the display. Let's see, right here. So when entry position of X is not equal to 0, that would be right here. The entry position gets updated if the initials are empty. So in that case, it'll start to register input for text, and that way you can actually insert your initials for the score. That would be right here. And then so it'll just display the appropriate initials when you enter them. If backspace is pressed, it'll actually delete an initial. And it needs at least one initial to um, actually needs one initial to actually be allowed to leave the input for that. So once it actually has one initial and enter is pressed, it checks to see if next score. So in this case, if player one and player two both got a high score, if it'll go through player one first, and then if player two had if it was in 2 player mode, next score would also have a value. And then if it didn't have a value, it was either in 1 player mode or it's already checking the second player, so it just enables the selection for uh, 1 or 2 player mode again. If next score is not equal to 0, that means it's in 2 player mode and still has to check another score. It'll set the next score to the current score right here. And okay. And then here is just more displaying the text that gets typed in. So we'll go back to the update list. So yeah. So when next score is equal to 0, that's when it knows that there are no more scores to check, and then it'll stop trying to check for a new score. This is just what I use. That way, if both player one and player two got a high score, like they can both put in their initials. So I just have a get destroy. Okay. Then here's the high score. So this is for the high score that gets displayed in the first row in the middle. Um, the initial display just takes the first. Um, it takes the. So by default, it'll be 0, 0. And then when the score gets updated, that's when it'll display. This is when it gets the first entry in the high score list, and it'll show that instead. Or if the player gets the highest score, it'll start showing that. Then the reset's the same as the other ones. Okay. Then I'll get into the flyweight pattern. So here's the font class I have. It's very similar to the demo, or it's pretty much the same as the demo. Same with the glyphs. Then I have the glyphs get created by a factory, and then the object pool with them. And then here's the sprite sheet. It's pretty much the same as the demo. And yeah, that is it for the HUD.